Welcome to Evangelistic Apologetics, an introduction to systematic Christian worldview. And we are doing our third part of the large series, and we are doing the science of science. Basically, we are going to do a scientific study on science and to determine what is scientific and what is not scientific after we have defined what science is. Okay, that's part we have done before, so if you want to know that, go back to what I taught before. But right now, we are following a session that we have taught the scientific standards for theories. So for now, all of the scientists that are practicing science, they are using these as standards to judge theories, whether they are scientific or not scientific, whether they are reliable or not reliable. And all of that is based on a two-directional approach to science, because we know everything we learn are from three sources. From bottom up is experience, from top down is faith, and in the middle is reason. Okay? Science is trying to minimize the faith part and maximize the experience part. So the first point of science is an empiricism. Okay? Empiricism means we focus on experience or experiments. Okay? And however, it is an open-minded empiricism. It does not say that what I do not experience does not exist. It is if it's real, it might not be visible. Okay? But I might believe it if reason compels me. Okay? So that is realist empiricism. So the first standard, if we see a theory, we will looking for proof, okay, and see if we can have experiments to verify that, okay, repeatable experiments. And if that cannot be done on all situations, we will pick samples and we will compare evidences and we'll calculate probabilities, how likely this conclusion is true based on the few evidence that we have. And all of these are the empiricist side. It's bottom up. And the other side is the top down, from reason. Okay? And while we're trying to minimize the faith part, we do admit that there are mathematical axioms, etc. Those are taken by faith, and the existence of truth is taken by faith. The existence of the world as reality is taken by faith. But let's minimize that part. Just take about the reason, rationalism, that we believe everything, behind everything there's a reason. Okay? And therefore we look for compatibility. If we have a theory, and after these two, if we cannot determine, we will go to the third. We'll see if the theory is compatible with the existing laws, other laws, theories that have been established, accepted, and proven. Okay? In other words, we will try to keep the paradigm. We don't want to rock the ship unless we have to. Okay? So that's the compatibility, the third standard. The fourth one is beauty. In other words, simplicity. The simpler the theory is, the more likely it is true. The more complex, then the less likely. So all of these is the rationalist side of science. Okay, the top-down side, not as far as faith, but as far as reason. And it is a reductionalist rationalism, because we want to be as simple as possible. Okay? And these are the standards that are already established for science. For now, we are trying to use the same standard to compare the theory of evolution with the theory of creation. Okay? Now, when we talk about evolution, we have two concepts, two types of evolution. And one is called micro-variation. Pay attention, I didn't use microevolution, because the word evolve is by itself. Well, the micro variation very often is by interference. See, when man put all of their intellect together, we can make big, long how to say, the big molecules that are used in life, such as, let's say, a DNA or something. We can make it. But a DNA is not life itself, but we can make the DNA. Okay? But that's inputting energy and wisdom and design into it. So evolution does not open to this external input. It's by itself. So, and evolution also has the idea of growth positively towards something greater. And however, in reality, while there are changes because of environment, etc., that change can be vacillating, can be going back and forth. So that's why I call it micro variation rather than evolution. But anyway, the idea is on the micro. Micro in the sense that the change is small. Okay? In the world, there are so many different kinds of lives. There are plants, invertebrate, invertebrate, the mammals, and the humans. They have different levels of complexity. The microevolution is a change in time, but it's a change of the small characteristics, but the complexity does not change. Okay? For example, human beings, in the beginning there was only one couple, Adam and Eve. And right now we have several different races with different colors of skin. How did that come out? Well, that was micro variation. We are all humans, so we are the same kind. That's why we can interbreed. People of different races, we can interbreed. So we are the same kind, but we have different characteristics. Those characteristics do not change the complexity. That's why the change is micro. It's small. Okay? And the change is variation. It can change back and forth. And it has been proven that if you find a white rat and you breed them and choose the darkest of the next generation, and in several generations, I've heard in 10 generations you can find a totally black rat from white rats just by breeding them and making the selective breeding. Okay? But that can be changed back. If you change it in the other direction, in the next 10 generations, you're going back to the same white rat. So in other words, microevolution is not what we're talking about here. Okay? Micro variation. Micro variation does exist in nature, and it can change back and forth, and it's not changed by itself, and it does not change complexity. So that's not what we're talking about. The macroevolution is what we're talking about. Okay, the theory of macroevolution, and that means the complexity of these of life, according to time, changes from the simple to the more complex. So plants to invertebrates to mammals to humans. See, that is macroevolution. It is this theory that I am comparing or judging by the scientific standards. Okay? And according to these 4 standards of science, okay, if we're talking about number 1, proof, can we use experiments to prove either the macroevolution for the beginning or biblical creation for the beginning? Well, the answer is for number 1 is no, you cannot do it. Because what? Because you cannot what? Cannot repeat history. Right? See, if you want to use experiment to prove in the beginning the life came from evolution, you have to repeat history. You have to restart from the Big Bang, and then the hot Earth, and then colder Earth, and then you have the starting from amoeba, and then going to the plants and invertebrate and mammals and human. But that cannot be done because we cannot repeat history. Okay? So in other words, we cannot use proof. The experiments to prove macroevolution. And on biblical creation, it's also no, because we cannot control God. If you want to prove biblical creation, you have to say, God, please recreate the universe and keep us somewhere to watch. Not in the universe. Recreate a new universe, not just like ours, and let us watch. Well, sorry, you cannot control God. So you cannot repeat history, you cannot control God. In other words, on the same standard of proof by experiment, okay, about the origin, either evolution or creation, you cannot prove them. Neither can be proven. Okay? However, on the second standard, in whether or not you can do find evidences and calculate their probabilities, well, you can do it. So first of all, on the micro variation, is that a evidence for macro evolution? Okay. The answer is not evidence for macro evolution. Why? Well, think about this. Microevolution is the change of characteristics without changing complexity. Okay? But the whole base of argument is that the complexity changes by the macroevolution. So if you have no change of complexity, then there is no support for the macroevolution, right? And even till today, there have been people who are quoting this as an evidence. They say once in England there was a forest that has white trees, white-skinned trees, okay, white barks, and on these white trees were white moths. Okay. And however, later as industrialization came, the trees were darkened by the soot and from the smoke, and therefore the white moths are easily spotted by their natural predators, and therefore the number of white moths reduced, and the number of the brown moths increased. Okay? And they use that as an evidence for macroevolution. Okay? They say, see, as environment changes, these things change, the number of changed, and probably the white moth adapted and became the brown moth. Okay? And that is a evidence for macroevolution. But if you think about carefully, it is not an evidence. Because, first of all, how do you know that the two kinds did not exist in the beginning? It's not that one kind became another kind. Both existed, but as the environment changed, something become easier to be taken by the predator. Therefore, it reduced number, and the other increasing number. But the changing number does not mean one become another. Okay? That's one thing. Number two, the moths remained moths. Their complexity didn't change. The complexity of a life is measured by the information written in the DNA of that life. The DNA's length is related to the complexity, not necessarily proportional, but it gives the possibility. See, it's just like a computer. When you have a big hard disk, you can store more information in there. It doesn't mean necessarily that when you have a hard disk, big hard disk, and you necessarily have more information, right? Some people have a computer and never stores anything, okay? But at least it gives the possibility, okay? So for a moth, it has a certain length of DNA, and it can store at most certain information. And that information never changed, never get more complex. The moth never became birds, which is more complex, right? So in other words, these are, the micro variation is not an evidence, but for the creationism, micro micro, not evolution, but variation, is an evidence for biblical creation. Why? Well, in the Bible, God created in the beginning very few kinds. And these kinds of lives can interbreed, and God also gave them the ability to have changes, to have plurality. So the few kinds, like human being, in the beginning there are only two individuals. It's one kind. Later we changed into the different races, and that's due to the variation and because of the change of environment. You know, you live in Africa, and it's very hot, so if you're very fair skinned, it's more likely you get cancer and die. But if you're darker skinned, you won't die. So that kind stayed. Okay, but it's still same kind of life. So people, different races can still intermarry. In other words, microevolution, microvariation is very hard to filter out. Microvariation is an evidence of biblical creation, of initial simplicity and later change into different characteristics without changing complexity. Okay, and on the macroevolution, if that is true, then we need new species. See, the kinds, the broad kinds in the beginning turn into species. Okay, if this is due to macroevolution, simpler life naturally becomes the more complex one. So we need new species, but we have no new species. Okay, we don't see new species. Okay, and on the other hand, the species are the species are what? Are reducing. Okay, extinct. Okay. Get extinct. So it's reducing. We're not increasing by reducing. So that is an evidence in support of biblical creation. So the evidence for macroevolution are weak evidences. For example, that here, okay, there. Weak evidence. Why we say it's weak evidence? Well, because they are arriving at a conclusion from very scanty evidences. For example, okay, I say you and I have about the same size, height, and our bone structure, let's say, we were pretty similar. Assume that we were later dead and buried and in tombs nearby each other. After many years, unfortunately, our bones are scattered and we only have a few left. But people found out, there are a few bones here for this individual and few bones from that individual. They have about the same time from carbon-14 dating, and they have about the same kind of cracks and damages and so on. So most likely, and they are buried nearby. So they do, well, the archaeologists many years later will reach conclusion that these two individuals are brothers. Okay? Well, is that a possibility? Yeah, everything is a possibility, all right? But how big is the probability? Well, it's iffy, okay? Not necessarily true, okay? And similarly, when they see the bones, the skulls of an ape and the man, they see their similarity and they say, since they are similar, then there must be a relationship evolving from one to another. That's, again, a derivation based on the surface, but not the reality. You never lived there. You never seen what happened. So that's weak evidence. It takes a lot of steps taken by faith in the middle in order to reach a conclusion. So that's a weak evidence. And also, they are reducing. Why? Because what we used to think to be proofs of the missing link as ape man, they are now all debunked. The so-called Java man, we found out it is composed of two individuals separated by hundreds of meters. One skull part is like a man, one leg part is like an ape. So to put them together, you call them ape man. But they might as well be two different individuals. Okay, the so-called the Chinese the hill caveman in Beijing, the Peking man. It found out actually there were two caves, one above another. The top one collapsed and got the one's bottom in the bottom trapped. And it's found that there are bones of apes and there are bones of actually modern man. If you put them together, and there are signs of fire. So if you put them together, you can think either that this is a time when the apes became modern man and they started to use fire. That's one conclusion, as the evolutionists. And the other conclusion is that there were modern men there who were mining and they were cooking the apes to eat. You see, both are possible. You see, so that has been debunked. And by the way, the original one was stolen. It's just lost. We don't know. Some people say, okay, the Japanese stole it. Some people say the Americans stole it. But it's not there. Whatever happened in Chinese museums are replicas. There's no real thing. Okay, and there have been so many things like the American Nebraska man is found out to be from one tooth of a boar. Now, it's not human, okay? And there was a Spanish, some kind of man, that found out it's from a bone of a donkey. And so right now, all of these so-called missing link, the ape man missing link, are gone. So there is none right now, okay? So these evidence are reducing. So in other words, if you count the evidence, put this together, it's not in support of macroevolution. Well, here we have biblical creation. We have strong evidence because science every day is finding out new laws of nature, and these findings are each of them are proving or supporting that these laws of nature cannot have gotten here by itself. They have to be by design. Okay? Just think about the more and more we get to know about the complexity of life. The more you know it, the less likely it came by itself. Okay? So these evidence are increasing. So I would say after you examine the second standard by evidence and calculate the probability, and the biblical creation is more scientific than macroevolution. Okay? So that is the first two standards. Okay? And the third standard, first of all, compatibility about other laws. First of all, in science, the macroevolution in the beginning has in the form of the Lamarckian evolution. Okay, they believe that acquired characteristics can be inherited. In other words, if I do exercise and make me very strong, and I build big muscles on my shoulder, and assuming that these can be inherited, my son would have naturally big muscle, and he keeps on exercising, he has bigger muscle, and after several generations, from my family will produce men who have wings. Okay. How likely is that? Well, that very unlikely, because we know that it cannot be done, because it has been proven that acquired characteristics cannot be inherited. Okay? And there have been people who prove this by cutting off the rat's tails. Okay? It's an acquired characteristic, no tail, rat. Right? So you cut off the rat's tail and let them breed. See next generation if they come with no rat, no tail. Well, they come with tail. You cut them off and come no tail. You keep on cutting, after nearly 100 generations, they still have the same size of the tail. You see? So acquired characteristics cannot be inherited. See? That was the original form of evolution. It's called the Lamarckian inheritance. He believed that the giraffes came from regular deers. So assuming that at a time when the food was scarce, the deers ate all of the food at their head level. So they stretched their neck and to eat the next higher leaves. And that was inherited according to Lamarck. And the next generation will have naturally longer necks. And they still live in hard situations, so they stretch their neck to be longer. And this keeps on until, many generations later, the deers become giraffes. But the problem is, for Lamarckian inheritance, you need to have, in the fossil evidence, you need to have not only the short-necked deers or have the long-necked giraffes, you also need to have the mid-length level of whatever call them giraffes, sometime in the middle. Okay, so that was a reasonable request. However, there has never been a mid-level neck length giraffe in the fossil record. So that is a problem. So this is actually called the anti-Lamarckian law. Evidence has proved that Lamarckian inheritance is impossible. Okay, and the next one we have called the Mendel's laws. Okay, Mendel's laws. Gregor Mendel was a monk who did experiments in the backyard of his monastery, and he proved this. But we're running out of time. We have to tell you the story next time. God bless. Amen.